Bright light city, gonna set my soul, gonna set my soul on fire. Got a whole lot of money that's ready to burn, gonna set those stakes up high. There's 1,000 wrestling fans just waiting out there, and they're all living devil may care. And I'm just a devil with love to spare, so Viva WrestleMania, Viva WrestleMania. Boom, let's crack on. What is going on, everyone? How are you doing? I hope you're doing good, because it is good to feel good. And yeah, it's officially WrestleMania season. It's the week of WrestleMania, and this weekend WrestleMania 41 is happening in Las Vegas. I'm a bit gutted I'm not there this year. I mean, I was there last year in Philly, which was absolutely incredible, but I know I had it in my mind thinking, oh, I'd love to go to Las Vegas for Mania, but it just wasn't meant to be. Although, never say never for New Orleans next year. But anyway, what we're going to do with this video today is, as per tradition, I do my predictions for every WrestleMania match, what I think is going to happen, who I think is going to win, etc. And obviously, this weekend I'll also be doing my live reactions, and I tell you what, it's got me thinking. This will be the 10th year in a row that I have been doing WrestleMania themed content for this channel, so that's really cool to think we've been doing it this long. But anyway, without further ado, let's crack on and do some predictions for WrestleMania. There was one scheduled match that was meant to happen that isn't happening anymore, that being Randy Orton versus Kevin Owens. I love the story that was going into this, and I know obviously real life has unfortunately gotten in the way where Kevin Owens has needed neck surgery, so that means this match is no longer happening, although it leaves Randy Orton without an opponent for WrestleMania. And I think if they are going to do something, you know, where Randy Orton does face somebody and it's a, like, you know, surprise opponent, I would love it to be Nick Aldis, because I know they've been hinting at it these last few weeks. Of course, Orton RKO'd Nick Aldis on SmackDown, and then last week on SmackDown, Orton was persistent at wanting to face Nick Aldis. I mean, at the time of recording, SmackDown hasn't aired this week, i.e. the Go Home SmackDown, so I guess it's all wait and see. But if it is a match that Orton is in, I think he's going to win it. So I'm going to go in night order for night 1 and night 2. So kicking off with night 1, we have the War Raiders versus the New Day for the World Tag Team Championships. And this is going to sound really crazy, but the World Tag Team Championships have not been defended on a premium live event since WrestleMania last year, and ironically that's when they were still the Raw Tag Team Championships, in line with their SmackDown counterparts. And obviously that great ladder match happened where the belts were split up, but since then, no, there's been no sign of, like, you know, tag team titles being defended on premium live events. I know we had, you know, one for the WWE tag team titles, DIY versus MCMG from the Raw Rumble, but apart from that, no showings for the Raw tag titles, which is a bit depressing, and that's where I feel like the depth within the Raw tag team scene is a bit underwhelming in my opinion. But another crazy thing I'm going to throw out here is the fact that the New Day, as either a tag team or a trio, have never won a match at WrestleMania, and no, I'm not including when Kofi Kingston beat Daniel Bryan to win the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 35, because that was a straight up singles match for Kofi Kingston. But apart from that, the New Day are 0-7 in matches as a unit at WrestleMania, which is depressing. This is a wrong that needs to be righted this weekend at WrestleMania, because I'm not being funny, the World Tag Team Championships have felt like an afterthought for a long time, and I feel like we need some new life, we need a new vision, we need a New Day. Yes it is, and I know the New Day are heels now, but yeah, bring on the New Day. And the next match we have is Rey Mysterio versus El Grande Americano, and coincidentally that's probably someone's coffee order. El Grande, can I get an El Grande Americano? But this is just some silly bollocks, this is, because of course, I think we all know, if you can put 2 and 2 together, you think it's Chad Gable. I mean, we'll find out this weekend, we'll probably see him on Mask or something, but I tell you what it does remind me of, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember SmackDown vs Raw 2011, from nearly 15 years ago, where in one of the Road to WrestleMania stories, Rey Mysterio came face to face with someone called Todo Americano, which in game was Jack Swagger. And so I'm thinking this is the exact same precedent where Chad Gable is quite clearly El Grande Americano. I mean, I guess it's let's find out and see what plays out, but at the same time, I just feel like it's a bit of a silly story. It is, you know. I get that, you know, it's parodying like real life luchadors, but it is a bit of a silly one, and I feel like, you know, this is something that probably wouldn't have been out of place on Raw a few months ago. So I think just for the sake of putting this to bed, I think I'm going to go with Rey Mysterio to win this match. The next match we have is Jade Cargill versus Naomi, and I'm going to throw something crazy out here. This is the first time in WrestleMania history, not including Playboy pillow fights or cat fights or any of those crazy types of matches. This is the first straight up one-on-one match between two women at WrestleMania that's not for a championship, which is just crazy. And I tell you what, both women deserve this position. So cast your minds back to WrestleMania last year. Jade Cargill and Naomi were teaming with Bianca Belair and they defeated Damage Control. Then of course Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair went on to become a tag team. They won the women's tag team titles twice. And then in November last year, in the lead up to Survivor Series, Jade Cargill got attacked. She was found, well, basically dead on top of a car, like bloody and bruised. And obviously the whole speculation was that, you know, someone was behind this, and obviously the fingers were pointed towards Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. But then ultimately Jade Cargill returned at the Elimination Chamber and she brutalized Naomi, and ultimately it was Naomi all along. It was Naomi all along. And I tell you what, it's quite a nice little bit of continuity, is that a member of the Anoa'i family is the main culprit of a whodunit storyline, and of course it was Naomi's father-in-law Rikishi from back in the day who was, of course, in that famous whodunit storyline, and like who ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin. And of course Rikishi revealed it was him. It was later retconned that it was Triple H who was the real mastermind behind it, but still, that counts. But honestly, I'm loving Naomi as a heel, and I know it's been a while since she's been a heel, and I feel like she's really coming into her own again, and I hope she factors into greater things this year. But I mean, initially when I was planning out this prediction, I did have Jade Cargill to win, but I'm actually going to go with Naomi to win this match. I think, you know, I think both of them are going to have a really good showing, but I really think Naomi needs the win to kind of like, you know, kind of get her across as like a really cool and brash heel. I think this will be really good. The next match we have is LA Knight, yeah, versus Jacob Fatu for the United States Championship. One prediction I made last year actually did come true, so not only did I correctly predict LA Knight beating AJ Styles, but I also correctly predicted him winning a championship, and sure enough, he beat Logan Paul at SummerSlam last year to win the United States Championship, and then only in the last few months he's regained the championship from Shinsuke Nakamura. So there we go, powers of prediction. But at the same time, I've really been impressed with Jacob Fatu. I mean, you know, he's been in WWE less than a year, and he's just been absolutely, like, entertaining to watch, you know, taking on the likes of Braun Strowman, you know, Kevin Owens, Randy Orton, all sorts, and, you know, really holding his own. He is absolutely incredible, and honestly, as part of Solo Sikoa's, like, you know, version of the Bloodline, Jacob Fatu is the highlight, I'm not gonna lie. I know it does basically mean that Jacob Fatu has been overshadowing Solo Sikoa, but honestly, Jacob Fatu is the real deal. And I have a feeling just how they've played it out on SmackDown in the last few weeks that probably Solo and Jacob might go their separate ways. And yeah, I think Fatu will win this match, and you know, let him have a really great singles run and be US champion, because I think he's just going to be absolutely cracking in this role. But yeah, Jacob Fatu to win. The next match we have is Tiffany Straton versus Charlotte Flair for the WWE Women's Championship. Now, it's a bit interesting with this match, because I kind of guessed that Charlotte Flair was going to win. I mean, I correctly predicted that Charlotte Flair was going to win the Royal Rumble after coming back from injury. But I just think, you know, my opinions have kind of changed on Charlotte Flair, and this might just be an unpopular opinion, but I really don't think Charlotte Flair should win this match, you know. As much as, you know, like, she's kind of been building herself up, she's been putting herself over. I mean, she's been a bit savage towards Tiffany Stratton, who in turn has reciprocated with her insults and all sorts, but I just don't want to see Charlotte Flair win this match. I mean, sure, she would add another world championship to her I've genuinely lost track of how many times she's been world champion now. There's been so many of these reigns. But at the same time, I really want to see Tiffany Straton continue to build herself up. She's been really coming into her own this last year. I mean, I know she's basically the babyface and all this, but I think Tiffy should win this match, personally. And I feel like if Tiffy did lose, then, you know, it means her momentum might get halted or something in favour of making Charlotte look good, and I just don't want to see that. That happened with Rhea Ripley a few years ago at WrestleMania 36, and it took her a long while to recover, and I'm glad that, you know, Rhea is in the position that she's in now. But ultimately, if I do have to put a time on this on my watch, I'm going to go with Tiffy time. The next match we have is Gunther versus Jey Uso for the World Heavyweight Championship. And I tell you what, these last few weeks have been incredible building to this match, because I know originally I was kind of thinking, is this really gonna, you know, light us all on fire? I guess it all remains to be seen. Of course, by surprise, Jey Uso won the Royal Rumble this year. I genuinely did not see that coming. And then, of course, you know, it was like, who is Jey going to challenge? And then, of course, you know, he set his mind on Gunther. Initially, I thought this was going to be a bit of a silly one, because Gunther has beaten Jey Uso on multiple occasions. I think Gunther is 3-0 against Jey Uso at the moment. So I guess that remains to be seen what happens. But also, in the last few weeks, this feud has been getting really, really spicy, because, of course, you know, a few weeks ago on Raw, Jimmy Uso slapped Gunther, and then Gunther got his revenge the following week on Raw, and I was there in London. That segment was absolutely incredible. Like, you know, Gunther just absolutely brutalizing Jimmy Uso, and then, you know, zip tying Jey Uso to the ropes, and, you know, not being able to help his brother. I think at one point Jey actually referred to Jimmy by his real name, and I'm like, careful with that. But it's like, but also the image of Gunther just covering himself in Jimmy's blood, absolutely incredible stuff. However, when I come to the prediction for this, I'm at a bit of a catch-22 on this. I want Jey Uso to win, but I don't want Gunther to lose, and I don't want to see Gunther lose back-to-back championship matches at WrestleMania, because, you know, that was a big loss that he had last year. You know, it ended his record-setting reign as Intercontinental Champion, but I think, but at the same time, I just don't think there's a perfect time to put the championship on Jey Uso. So ultimately, if I do have to pick a prediction for this, I'm going to go with Gunther to retain. I know my heart is saying, let Jey win this, but yeah, I'm going to go with Gunther to retain. And then for night one's main event, we have Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns versus CM Punk. And if we think about it, this is probably the closest we're going to get to a Shield triple threat match happening at WrestleMania. This is going to just throw something crazy here. This is going to be the first time in 6 years that Roman Reigns has not been in a World Championship match at WrestleMania. And in turn, if we want to really wind the clocks back, the first time that neither him or Brock Lesnar have been in a world title match since WrestleMania 30. I know, that was 11 years ago. What the hell? But anyway, let's go into this match, because there's a lot to kind of like pick out. Of course, Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns have their history from the Shield days. It was Seth Rollins who broke up the Shield 11 years ago, and yes, they would have like the odd few reunions and, you know, encounter each other throughout the years. But you know, it was last year at WrestleMania, of course, where Seth Rollins in his Shield gear, you know, basically prevented Roman Reigns from retaining the Undisputed Championship. And I guess you could make an argument that with Roman Reigns choosing to smash the chair into Rollins' back like Rollins did to Reigns back in the day, I guess you could argue that was what inadvertently cost Roman the Undisputed Championship to Cody Rhodes. So of course there's that to play with. Then of course Seth Rollins and CM Punk have their, you know, animosity towards one another. Obviously, CM Punk was very vocal about, you know, why he left WWE back in the day, and, you know, in the mind of Rollins, you know, he's been, like, you know, a champion for WWE, like, you know, bigging themselves up. Of course, it really caught a lot of us off guard when CM Punk returned at Survivor Series War Games back in 2023, and that was such a great moment. And then, of course, you know, Rollins and Punk would eventually have their clash on the Raw debut on Netflix back in January. Punk won that. Then, of course, they had a steel cage match at Madison Square Garden for an episode of Raw back in March. Roman basically allowed Rollins to win that match, and then Bruce Lee beat him up. And then off the back of that, the match was set, and it was also revealed on an episode of SmackDown in London that this match was going to main event night 1 of WrestleMania, and thus CM Punk is a main eventer of WrestleMania. Absolutely crazy stuff. If you were to tell someone this about, 11 years ago after he walked out of WWE, I don't think anyone would have believed you. But now that I mentioned Punk, I completely forgot to mention that obviously the story between him and Roman Reigns. So of course it was at Survivor Series War Games back in November that CM Punk teamed with Reigns alongside the Usos and Sami Zayn in the War Games match. And the reason why Punk did it was as a favour to Paul Heyman. And obviously there's been this argument about what is this favour? And although I thought the favour was going to be something else, it was ultimately revealed that the favour was going to be that Paul Heyman was going to be in CM Punk's corner for this match, and thus ending the partnership between the Tribal Chief and the Wise Man. And I'm sad to see Roman go at it by himself, but I guess let's just see how this all plays out in the match itself. Which, speaking of which, I think there's going to be a lot of callbacks to, matches from years past. And, initially I couldn't put my head on someone who I think is going to win this. But then I've kind of gone back and forth on the prediction for a few weeks now. But I've ultimately settled on Seth Rollins winning this match. Now, the reason being is obviously he, spoke to Paul Heyman and said, you owe me a favour. And you can make of that what you will, but I really don't know what will happen. It would be really interesting to see if Paul Heyman turns on CM Punk and officially turns on Roman Reigns as well, thus officially aligning himself with Seth Rollins. That'll be an interesting dynamic to see, but let's see how this plays out. I've got Seth Rollins to win this one. Then kicking on with the Night 2 predictions, we're going to start with Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez versus Lyra Valkyria and Bayley for the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships. Now, I'm going to be quite honest here, and I'm going to be a bit pernickety with this. I really don't like the fact that almost every year without fail at WrestleMania, there's always going to be a thrown together tag team match with women involved, and it really does show the lack of depth within the division. We could be having established tag teams here and there, but no, they ultimately just decide, do you know what, let's put these two together. It's like they throw two darts at someone on a dartboard, and then it's you're a tag team. So of course Lyra and Bayley were obviously feuding over the Women's Intercontinental Championship. Lyra retained against Bayley, and then all of a sudden they're put together as a tag team. They win the gauntlet match, and now they're challenging for the Women's Tag Team titles. I think, me being pernickety, but I think it remains to be seen who's going to win this match. But I really don't see Lyra and Bayley winning this match. I really want to see Liv and Raquel win this match because, Liv Morgan's had a bloody great year as the Women's World Champion, and I feel like she needs to factor in some cooler things down the line. So hopefully with this match, we can right a few wrongs and we can have Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez retain the Women's Tag Team titles. The next match we have is AJ Styles versus Logan Paul. And I tell you what, I'm really happy to see AJ Styles back in wrestling, because I know he suffered a really bad injury in October on an episode of SmackDown, and I think the trajectory was that he was going to be out for over a year, which would have been unfortunate. And then when his music hit during the Royal Rumble match back in February, I thought to myself, this is amazing, it's great to have him back. And also the fact that, he got his old theme back as well, because he got Death Rebelled last year at WrestleMania, which was embarrassing. I distinctly remember being in the crowd and oh, Death Rebel, what have you done? But they righted that wrong, so that's a good thing. But anyway, Logan Paul is obviously he's doing the whole, I'm not fighting for free, I will only fight for the money at WrestleMania. Of course he is the cheeky bastard, but it's got me thinking as well ahead of this match, I love how savage we were towards Logan Paul during Raw in London a few weeks ago. We just would not let him get a word in. There was all sorts of chants. There was like Logan's a wanker and all sorts, and also Prime is shit and all sorts of funny stuff. But also it's got me thinking about who is going to be in a Prime bottle this year. I know in the last 2 years you've had KSI back at 39, and then you had ISHO Speed last year. That was a funny moment watching that live. But it'd be interesting to see who is going to be in the Prime Bowl this year. I guess that will remain to be seen. But anywho, for this prediction, I'm going to go with AJ Styles because il est vraiment phenomenal. The French crowds have just got that ingrained into me. And speaking of which, I'm hoping he's at Clash in Paris so they can chant that again to their heart's desire. The next match we have is Bron Breakker versus Dominic Mysterio versus Finn Balor versus Penta for the Intercontinental Championship. And it's interesting because they say all men are created equally, but then you look at Penta, you look at Dominic Mysterio, you look at Finn Balor, and you know for a fact that statement is not true. I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked there. But I can't believe Bron Breakker hasn't done his own version of the Steiner Mass promo on the main roster yet. Come on, guys. But I tell you what, Bron Breakker's been killing it. He has on main roster since he came up. I tell you what, I really enjoyed the match he had last year. This was during WrestleMania season, but when he had the match with Baron Corbin against Nathan Frazier and Axiom for the NXT tag titles, that was just really cool to see live. But then of course, you know, Bron Breakker's really came into his own. He is the big dog. He is now the big dog, which is funny because he also uses a spear. But you know, he's really been holding his own as Intercontinental Champion. And of course, it's been really nice to see Penta finally show up in the WWE, and you know, he's really coming to his own. And also, for that matter, seeing Rey Fenix now on SmackDown, I'm sure they're going to reunite at some point, the Lucha Brothers back together in tag team fashion. But then I think the Judgment Day are going to come to an end. I feel like they've been on edge for the last few weeks, and I feel like this is just my unpopular opinion, but I feel like the Judgment Day just haven't had the groove anymore like they did back in the day. I feel like since Rhea Ripley and Damian Priest were ousted from the group, they've really just kind of like gone down in terms of quality. But you know, it doesn't come without its highlights. You know, I really enjoy Carlito just, you know, being just there as just basically the sidekick of the group, and he's just having a lot of fun moments. I love the spear that Bron Breakker did to Carlito a few weeks ago on Raw, and then as a little callback on Raw this past week, you had like, you know, Carlito basically running for his life. But then coming onto this dynamic with the Judgment Day, I feel like, you know, the tensions between Dominic and Finn are gonna finally come to a head, and I'm gonna throw a very wild card prediction into this match, and that is I have got Dominic Mysterio to win this match. I really think, you know, these last few years being part of the Judgment Day has really allowed him to come into his own, and I feel like he's ready to go off on his own, you know, maybe take Liv Morgan with him because they're a thing in storyline. But yeah, if I do have to pick a prediction, I've got Dominic Mysterio to win the Intercontinental Championship. That'll be fun to see all of that transpiring. The next match we have is Damian Priest versus Drew McIntyre in a Sin City street fight. And I tell you what, this match, a lot of people are saying, oh, why is this match happening at WrestleMania? But if you think about it, it makes logical sense, and from a storyline perspective. So let's cast our minds back to WrestleMania last year, for example. Drew McIntyre won the World Heavyweight Championship from Seth Rollins. CM Punk then attacked Drew McIntyre after the match, then allowing Damian Priest to capitalise and cash in the Money in the Bank contract, thus beating Drew and becoming the World Heavyweight Champion. Then, of course, at Clash at the Castle in Scotland last year, you had Drew McIntyre just about to beat Damian Priest, but then a disguised CM Punk then cost him, and thus Damian Priest took advantage of that and retained. The same happened at Money in the Bank, where Drew McIntyre was going to cash in his Money in the Bank contract against Priest and Seth Rollins, only for CM Punk to then come out and attack McIntyre again, and of course Damian Priest taking advantage of that, thus retaining the World Heavyweight Championship once again. Then in the Royal Rumble match, you had Drew McIntyre being eliminated by Damian Priest, and then likewise at Elimination Chamber, the same thing happened. But then of course, McIntyre then crashed out, and you know, he attacked Damian Priest, allowing for him to be eliminated by Logan Paul in the Elimination Chamber, and thus setting the stage for this match. I'd say what was really funny a few weeks ago on SmackDown was Damian Priest chokeslammed Drew McIntyre onto the car window, and like, you know, real glass was involved in that. And then just as that was happening, CM Punk was walking by and he had a little chuckle, and I love how that was a nice funny little callback to, of course, the what I like to call the Jack Perry butterfly effect, that caused CM Punk to leave AEW, come back to WWE, and now he's a main eventer of WrestleMania. So thank you very much for doing that, Jack. But anyway, if I do have to pick a prediction, considering McIntyre has been on the receiving end of Damian Priest's antics throughout the last year, I think it's only fair that Drew McIntyre finally gets a victory over Priest and, you know, puts this all to bed. Next match we have for this is Io Sky versus Bianca Belair versus Rhea Ripley for the Women's World Championship. Now, again, I'm going to be very pernickety on this, which is something I don't like doing, but I genuinely think that this match, like, you know, could have been booked so much better, or like the build to this match could have been booked so much better. So of course it makes sense. Io Sky won the Women's World Championship because of a distraction from Bianca Belair. But then, of course, you know, Rhea Ripley was then, you know, laying her claim, being like, you know, I was inadvertently cost by Bianca Belair. I should be allowed to, like, you know, put myself back into this match. Then, of course, the weeks on Raw where it was like, oh, we can't allow this to happen. But then it was like, oh yeah, you can get into this match as long as you beat Io Sky with Bianca Belair as a special guest referee. Then obviously the match ended in a double DQ. Then Adam Pearce is then like, oh, sod it, you're going to be in the match anyway. And it just makes me think, that all could have been wiped out, and it just feels a bit silly. But I know obviously Bianca Belair did win the Elimination Chamber match, so therefore allowing her to be here. But I guess it all remains to be seen what transpires in this match. I think all three women are going to have an absolutely cracking match, I'm not going to lie. And I know I would like to see, you know, either Bianca Belair or Rhea Ripley back with a world title, but at the same time, I want to see Io Sky retain this. My reason being is, of course, last year going into WrestleMania, Io Sky was the women's champion. She lost to Bayley. It would be a shame for her to, like, you know, lose a women's title match in back-to-back WrestleManias. So let's go Io. I'm on the Io train. It's like a bullet train in Japan, but it's the Io train. Let's go Io Sky. And finally, our main event for night 2 is Cody Rhodes versus John Cena for the undisputed WWE Championship. Whew, this match is going to be absolutely incredible. I'm sure it will be. And, like, you know, regardless of the result, I think it's going to be absolutely incredible. So, of course, it was last year at WrestleMania 40 that Cody Rhodes won the Undisputed Championship. In fact, I'm wearing the exact same shirt I wore on the night, and that was an incredible moment to experience live. You know, he had a little help from a few friends, Jey Uso, John Cena, Seth Rollins, The Undertaker came out. That was just, all of that happening in, like, real time to experience was just incredible. And of course, you know, Cena was there front and center when Cody Rhodes was celebrating winning the championship. I tell you what, Cody has had a really decent reign of this last year. Sure, there have been a few hiccups here and there, but, you know, some of the feuds he's had with AJ Styles, with Kevin Owens, and the occasional one-off matches he's had, like, he's been absolutely incredible as champion, and it's lovely to see him finally as a champion, and like as a WWE champion. But then, of course, we have John Cena, who, of course, is officially retiring this year. He announced it last year, and, you know, going into 2025, it was like, you know, his first appearance on Raw in Los Angeles on the debut on Netflix. It was a case of, what am I going to do to get to WrestleMania? I'm going to enter the Royal Rumble. He was the runner-up, losing to Jey Uso. Then, of course, after that, he then announced himself to be in the Elimination Chamber match. He didn't have to qualify, of course. But then he won the Elimination Chamber, and that segment, like, you know, with The Rock and Travis Scott as well, which is absolutely incredible. You know, Cody telling Rock to go F himself, and then the heel turn as well was just absolutely incredible and executed to perfection. So kudos on WWE for doing that and, like, pulling the trigger on something that, you know, maybe someone wouldn't have done back in the day. But of course, these last few weeks on Raw have seen, you know, both John Cena and Cody Rhodes going at it together on the microphone. The episode of Raw in London that I was at was just absolutely incredible. You know, both men didn't hold back. You know, you know, Cena accusing Cody of being his chaperone, you know, going to, you know, starting up another company and, you know, taking money from billionaires, and then of course Cody firing back with like, you know, Cody wasn't handpicked to be, you know, the top guy the fans chosen, and that he was chosen by someone in an office who we don't talk about anymore, and it was like, oh, shots fired and all that malarkey. But of course, I've been torn on this prediction as well. But if I do have to pick a prediction for this, I was originally going to go for Cody to retain and continue his championship reign, but my initial thinking was, I do want to see John Cena win a world title this year and, you know, win his 17th world title, thus breaking Ric Flair's record. My initial thinking was not at WrestleMania, but then I've had a bit of a change of heart, which seems a bit ironic to be wearing this shirt. So ultimately, I'm going to go with John Cena to win his 17th World Championship. I think there are going to be some shenanigans that are to play in this, but I guess it remains to be seen. I do think The Rock might just be involved because, you know, he's a little bit of a scallywag he is, being the final boss and all that. But, yeah, John Cena. I know it's hard to say this being a big Cody Rhodes fan, but I think John Cena's going to win this match. And yeah, those are my predictions for WrestleMania. There was a lot to go through, but we got there in the end. And I'm sure this weekend, I know people are saying, oh, it's not going to be as good. I'm sure it's going to be great nonetheless. But I'm really looking forward to it, seeing how it all plays out. And I'll be obviously keeping you guys in tune with my live reactions. I'll see you over the weekend for those. And as is per tradition, I will leave you here and leave you with some advice. That is always to enjoy yourself, stay safe, and make the most of every opportunity that comes your way. Thank you for watching, and peace.